L.R. Braden, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here, Mark.
Yeah, this time we don't have the distractions of all those other Writer of the Year candidates like we had on the last chat. I think the last episode of the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast is just all L.R. Braden all the time. No pressure.
Yeah, I'm like, see if I can handle the pressure of carrying the conversation all by myself. I don't know.
Yeah. Very good. Well, the good news is we have a headline, we have news, breaking news, a brand new 5th book in your series of Mettle and Magic just came out this month, correct?
That's right. It came out on May 14th.
And it's book 5 in the whole series.
It is, yes.
Yeah. Well, let's just, dive in. Let's get readers excited about your series and tell us what world we're in and what is happening.
All right. Well, so my series it's called The Magicsmith. And it is an urban fantasy series. It incorporates pieces from mystery, a little bit of romance, lots of action, and plenty of magic. It is, as you said, a 5-book series. So the 5th book just came out. I'm going to hold this up for those of us in the visual.
Yes, nice.
The first book in the series is called A Drop of Magic, and it sort of sets the stage for the world, which is very similar to ours. For those of us who live in Colorado, you'll recognize a lot of the landmarks, cities. Excuse me. Alex Blackwood actually lives just above Nederland, Colorado, and she works in a bookstore in Boulder. She sells her art in a gallery in Boulder, so lots of local features there.
So when did she become aware of this sort of other universe and all these other issues that were happening out there?
So in Alex's world, the Fae kind of made their presence known to humankind about 15 years before the first book takes place. And when the Fae kind of came out of there was a lot of uproar, a lot of factions splitting off in humanity. We ended up with a group who wanted to abolish all magic. And this led to the Fairy Wars, which lasted for several years. And Alex was in middle school at the time of the Fairy Wars. And so that's when she first became aware of the existence of magic, at which point her father actually went off to fight in the Fairy Wars and he never came home. And so Alex has not exactly a hatred of magic, but she certainly resents the Fae and resents magic and the part that it played in losing her father.
So I'm a realist. I'm not a, I'll just full disclosure, I'm not a urban fantasy guy. So forgive me for really basic questions, but when you say the wars, how do you get to this place where the wars are going on? It's not something we can see around us, correct?
In this case, it is actually.
Okay.
So in the Magicsmith universe, the Fae do exist in different realms that sort of overlap ours, and humans can't go to those realms. There are magical portals, so, a Fae could kidnap a human and take them into one of their realms or whatever, but for the most part, humans can't interact on the same plane where the Fae live. But the Fae realms don't connect directly to each other. So they need crossroad worlds, which is what our world is. It's a place of ambient magic, but not magical beings necessarily. And so they want access to our world. The reason that they kind of came out and revealed themselves is because they needed humans to know that they were there, because the wild places of the world where the fairy portals were have been shrinking with human expansion. Fae don't deal well with iron, so they can't do cities. So they were hoping to sort of secure passage through our world. And some humans were like, oh, absolutely, everyone can share the world. And some humans were like, no, it's our world, you guys have to get out. And that's what caused the wars. And during those wars, the magic that the Fae use, they have some magic that humans can't perceive, illusion magic, mental magic, stuff like that. They also have elemental magic. They can throw lightning and fireballs. They have transformative magic. We have shapeshifters and things like that. And then on the human side, there are actually a very small percentage of the population, like maybe 1% of the population, are human practitioners who are actually able to use a different sort of magic. These are the people who historically would be considered witches and burned at the stake, those kind of people. So there are a few human practitioners as well who the humans had on their side. And so it caused huge magical clashes, which left giant scars on our world. In this universe, I call them the wastes, and they're just dead places where nothing can live, nothing can grow. So you can absolutely see the evidence of the war in the world.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Do you tell everything from your protagonist perspective, or do you go back and forth to the Fey world?
I do have one single narrator. So Alex Blackwood is my main character. She is the first person narrator for the entire series.
Okay.
So everything is from her perspective. And we do, because of the type of person that she is, as she discovers more and more things about herself, she gets access to more and more of the secret parts of the magical world. So, like in the very first book in the series, she really doesn't know anything at all about magic. And so she has a fairy knight that sort of helps guide her. And that book is all about learning her innate magic, how it works, what she can use it for. But it does still take place predominantly in our world. She actually takes until book 3, Fairy Forged, is the first time that she crosses one of the Fae portals and actually goes to one of the Fae courts. So she actually gets to go to their world and interact with them on their turf.
Wow. Does each book take place where she is growing year by year, or does it all take place about the same point in time?
Her transformative arc is a relatively short period of time. It's a few months. So the first book starts just before Halloween. So it's mid-October. The 5th book wraps up mid-February.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So
Wow.
it's kind of like a month a book.
Yeah. Yeah, or a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The actual books take place over somewhere between 1 to 2.5 weeks, depending on the book. And then there's usually a little bit of a gap between the books, with the exception of between books 4 and 5. They happen literally back to back. She goes to sleep at the end of book 4, wakes up at the beginning of book 5.
Gotcha. You run down the titles for us.
The first book is called A Drop of Magic. The second is Courting Darkness. The third is called Fairy Forged. The 4th book is Casting Shadows. And then the 5th book that just came out is Of Mettle and Magic.
And are we getting close to the end of the story and the end of the arc? Where are we with book 5?
So when I originally started writing this series, I sat down and I thought to myself a story. And I said, okay, here's the story I want to tell from beginning to end. And this is Alex's arc about learning who she is and what she can do and her place in the world. And it was a 5-book arc. But around book 2 or 3, my publisher said, hey, we really like these stories and we'd like to make this a continuing series. And so I made some adjustments to my plot lines. And so while book 5 still, it is the conclusion of that first arc for Alex's character development that I intended, it has turned into more of just a turning point in the series so that I can then kick off into a new arc. So book 5, it brings together the elements of the first 4 books, and it constitutes sort of a paradigm shift for the world that Alex lives in, and everybody has to sort of take a new stance. Over the course of this series, at the beginning, the world it's sort of an uneasy piece, and then as the series continues, that piece degrades and more tension comes out, and everybody is looking at a new war breaking out. And so book 5 is sort of where we really come to a head and have to change directions. So while it was originally the close, it's now sort of just an important turning stone for her. And we'll have a whole new set of books coming out in the series.
Wow. Sounds like you have a very supportive publisher.
I do. She's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah.
My publisher, her name is Deborah Dixon, and she runs Bellbridge Books, which is an imprint of Bell Books. And for those of you who've ever read the Goal, Motivation, and Conflict book, she's the author of that.
That's a lot of writers have read that, both urban fantasy, just everybody.
Yeah, it's a good across the board standard writing advice.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little story about how you landed there, and how did you end up with her?
Sure. I actually owe that a lot to Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. It was my either my first or second writers conference that I attended, and I was sitting in a business class next to a woman named Ella Marie, who turned out to be an acquiring agent for Bel Castro Agency. And so I had this agent sitting next to me. It was very nerve-wracking for me. I had never talked to an agent before.
Yeah.
And so I was doing all these activities with her about how to pitch books. This was a class on how to pitch books. So I'm like, well, if I was to pitch my book to you. And so she gave me some pointers, told me how to clean it up a little and to send it in, and I did. And they signed me. And it took about a year from signing my contract with my agent to land a contract with my publisher, which was Bellbridge. It was great. I got an email from Deborah saying, hey, my schedule is crazy full, but I loved the voice in your story. Wow. And I just had to take it. And so I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
That is incredible. Wow. And she's been a big help. Does she help with the actual stories along the way and the editing?
Absolutely, yeah. So she's my first content editor.
Wow.
So I write my books, I revise it, and then I send it to her. And then she spends a couple months with the book and sends back pages of revision notes and says, hey, here's some stuff that didn't make sense. Here's some stuff that was slow. You can cut that out. Here's some stuff that you need to rearrange. And so she sends me a list of how to make my story better, which I love. I love constructive criticism. And so then I sit down with that for a month and send it back to her, and we do a little back and forth and try to polish it up.
Is she right most of the time?
Yeah, actually, all of the advice that she's given me has been really terrific. I love that we're so often on the same page, and the thing doesn't make sense to me, I can just write to her and ask her to clarify it. I love that I ended up with her as my editor and my publisher. It's really so fulfilling for me.
Well, it looks like you've really found some fans. You've got lots and lots of reviews coming in on Amazon, at least as one measure. I don't know if that's how you measure it, but you must be somewhat thrilled, I imagine, by getting a response from readers out there.
I am overwhelmed by the amount of positive feedback I have gotten in the not even quite 2 years since I published my first book. Like, wow. I'm still pretty new to this. And when I saw that over 10,000 copies of my first book, I was just like floored. I couldn't believe it. And I've gotten some, I didn't like the main character. This series isn't for me. Or, little nitpicky things. And they're like, the series isn't for me. And I'm like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Not every book is for every reader. And I absolutely understand that. And I'm like, good. But like so many people have they've compared me to authors who I love, which is amazing. Like even being able to be mentioned in the same breath as these amazing authors that I read. And I'm just like, wow, they're comparing me to, Patricia Briggs. And I'm like, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. So I was about to ask you some of your sort of guiding light writers out there that you really follow and that you might want to mention as if you like XYZ, then you might like L.R. Braden.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the same genre writers that I love to read. I love Patricia Briggs, Ilona Andrews, Shannon McGuire. They're all really heavy hitters in the urban fantasy. They all have the same kind of continuing series that I'm doing here, where you're following through the world. You're following the same character through the world. All of them amazingly talented authors. I'll also throw out there Robin McKinley. She doesn't do series so much, but again, a very talented writer. And one of her books, it's called Sunshine, was one of the fantasy books that I read kind of before urban fantasy really was much of a genre, and it really stuck with me. So,
Wow, very cool. Are there any non-urban fantasy writers or just straight up literary or mystery or any other romance, anything that you also would tout?
um, I I have so many authors that
Yeah,
I love. I love
yeah.
Brandon Sanderson for modern epic fantasy. I think he's phenomenal. Classic fantasy. I love Pierce Anthony. I read like every Xanth book he ever wrote. Yeah, I don't know. I could list names all day and never
Yeah,
get through all of the talented authors out there.
yeah. What have you learned looking back? I know it's only been a few years, but looking back from book one to book five, if you were to say to somebody starting out, look, took me a little while to figure this out, but here's something that might help you cut a corner to get quicker and better, faster at what you do.
So, as far as tricks that I've learned for getting faster,
If
my
that's,
best advice would be to listen. So, every person hears your story and gives you a piece of feedback. File it away in your head. And then when you're writing your next story, have that stuff that you can pull from. Because I find that every time I write a book, I have to revise it less because I have all of the advice from the book that came before it that I'm thinking while I'm writing.
is there an example of that you can recall, that a specific example that,
So one specific example that came from my very first book is that Deborah told me I used the word it too much as a pronoun. And she's like, be specific. So this now when I write, every scene that I write, I'm like, can I give a specific example of this? I, try to cut out as many pronouns as I can. Don't use thing, don't use stuff, don't use it, and give very specific examples of what I'm trying to describe.
yeah. Is there anything about the world that you built and the character that you built that, you kind of wish you'd done something different, maybe, or
So, one thing that I did that I wish I had done a little bit differently is so it's difficult to balance a real strong kick butt female character and not make her rhymes with witchy.
yeah,
So at one point, I want to say it was in book 2, some of my reviewers had complained a little bit about Alex's character being a little too wishy-washy, and so I wanted to make her a little bit stronger, and I ended up making her kind of grumpy. And then I kind of smoothed her out by the time that I got book 3, and I found the balance of how I could really make her a strong character without making her antagonistic towards people, because I've never really liked that in stories where it's like, okay, to show that this is a really strong independent woman, we're going to make her argue with everybody. And I've never really liked that as just a trope. And then I ended up using it in my second book, and I kicked myself for it afterwards because I'm like, why did I keep making her yell at people? But
Yeah.
it's printed now. I can't change it. All I can say is that I did smooth it out in the later books.
Yeah. So you have elements of suspense, elements of romance, urban fantasy. Are these PG rated? Are they R rated? And how do you balance all those elements?
I would say that my books are maybe PG-13.
Mm.
There is violence in them. I would say the second book is probably the darkest. It deals with a very dark antagonist character who gets his hands on Alex at one point, and she experiences a little bit of torture at his hands, and there are some just nasty characters in that one. So there's definitely some very dark elements in that one. So, for people who have like triggers of stuff like that, it's generally good for them to know. On the romance side of it, I have a subtle romance subplot that goes through the series. Alex doesn't have there aren't like gratuitous sex scenes. So there's some kissing, and later in the series there's some mostly off the page bedroom scenes, but nothing explicit.
Yeah. I was just wondering, at what you must have decided at what sort of tone or level you want to hit, what audience you're trying to reach.
Yeah. So for me, urban fantasy and paranormal romance often get placed side by side. In fact, a lot of people describe my books as paranormal romance. And with the first book, that's actually the most negative feedback reviews that I got with. They're like, where's the romance? There's not enough romance. And I kept saying, it's not actually a paranormal romance series. It's an urban fantasy series. They're very similar, except for the level of romance you'll find in the books. With an urban fantasy series, a lot of it is based more on the mystery, suspense, thriller side of it.
Gotcha.
So lots and lots of action scenes.
Yeah. Are you completely invested in this series? I think you are. The answer is yes, you're completely invested in this series, but do you have other ideas percolating that you'd like to just sort of jump over and start on something else completely different?
Absolutely. So I have this, and I'm going to keep going on this, and I have my spin-off series that I'm working on right now that is also in the Magicsmith universe that'll be working in parallel. But I also have a lot of stories that I would just love to have the time to start on. And in fact, I have 5 books, a 5-book middle grade series that I promised my daughter that I would write. We've figured out all the characters, and I've been building the world and drawing the maps, and I haven't had time to actually start writing it.
Wow. Because you're under deadline. Sounds like you need to meet some.
Exactly. Yeah. Since I have the contract for the Magicsmith books, I'm like, okay, I have to do these ones. And then I'm trying to figure out how I can sort of incorporate other writing around it, or if I need to like take a break from one to do the other. I don't know. I haven't quite figured out how to balance that part yet.
Yeah. So the first book in the series came out 2 years ago, but you had been contemplating or working on writing the first book for many years before that.
Yes. So
but not that many years overall from when you first started writing.
No. So from when I first started writing my first book, which was the first thing I ever started trying to write, to when I got that book agented, was about 5 years of writing and tweaking that first story.
And now you're 5 books in, and it's been 2 years since that first book came out.
Yes.
And so, can you quite believe what you're doing?
I can't. It's amazing. It's been so gratifying to me to really come at this and realize that it's something that I can do, and the response has been overwhelming as far as just encouraging me to keep going. I get emails from total strangers saying, when's your next book coming out? I want to pre-order it. When's the pre-order going up? I'm like, I'm still writing it.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it really must be so sort of satisfying to know that an itch, an inkling, an idea that you wanted to produce something, put art out in the world based on consuming something along the same line, saying, I can do that, and then following through and seeing it through to fruition must be extremely gratifying.
It is. It's such a wonderful feeling going from that original, sitting there reading my favorite books, going, I really love reading these stories, and I have stories in my head, and maybe other people would love reading my stories. And just going from that original germ of an idea and actually getting my words in print and into people's hands. And it's so amazing.
Yeah. Sometimes I stop and think about the number of steps between an idea or a scene in a writer's head, then putting it on the page in some sort of code, what we call words. And then somebody else has to pick up those words, use their eyeballs to take in the information, and then their brain processes and builds those scenes in their head. And there has to be a sort of a conversation going on there, but it's happening with hundreds, hopefully, or thousands, maybe tens of thousands of readers who are, rebuilding those same scenes. They may not be the same as in the writer's head, but they're pretty darn close, or some version of them. And there's a lot of things that have to happen for an audience to build and an audience to start connecting with the character and the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every time I read a review where the person, mentions specifically something about my world building or about my characters and how they really spoke to them. And I'm like, it's an amazing sensation to be able to be connected to these strangers that I've never met in real life. And somehow we've been able to see the same pictures in our head, to have the same story unfold. It's very amazing.
Yeah. Do you think that an urban fantasy or a fantasy writer, science fiction writer, do you have to have a point of view about the real world in order to bring that point of view to your fantasy world? Do you go about your day thinking about how you're processing the world and seeing how the pieces fit, and then, understanding or trying to make sense of that world, and then say, okay, I have a point of view and I have something I want to say, but I'll tell it through my urban fantasy series?
Absolutely. I think no matter what kind of writing someone writes, I think that their worldview is going to color what comes out. In the case of my Metalsmith universe, Magicsmith universe, it absolutely shows I've been thinking about and kind of mulling over in my head. And I just did a guest blog post about this in the Big Idea, but I like that with speculative fiction, I got to build this world and I can talk about issues that I find difficult to talk about that are in our world. So I was talking about how the problems that we see with social discontent and discrimination and all of the standard, say, sex, race, ethnicity, all of those things that we struggle with as a society. And I can reflect those in my world using the different groupings that I have. So I have the Fae, and I have the werewolves, and I have the purity humans, and I have the practitioners, and I can reflect the discontent that I see in our world without having to necessarily, be part of that same
Right.
dialogue. Because there are a lot of things that I could get in trouble for saying.
Yeah.
That if world, I made it up, I can say anything I want. I can't get in trouble for saying, well, this is how this group of people is treating that group of people.
Right. Very good. Fascinating. You do keep a blog on your website and links to various pieces you write. So folks, what is the website? We can send people there to check that out.
www.lrbraden.com.
Excellent. Very good. Well, congratulations on the new book, and congratulations on the series, and congratulations on having a publisher who's excited about your works. That's just fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So we've already mentioned some authors, but our last wrap up question, if you'd like to promote one book in particular and one particular writer, we always like to, you've done a lot paying it forward already, but maybe one more crack at it.
One more, huh?
Yeah. Maybe that first early book that just turned you on.
I have it on the shelf right here behind me.
There you go.
Robin McKinley's Sunshine.
Excellent.
I don't think he gets nearly enough credit.
There you go. Very good. Well, Braden, thank you so much for your time. Wish you luck, and keep us posted on all your progress.
I will. Thank you so much for having me here, Mark.